Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going on a long journey, one that stretches back thousands of years, a journey into the land we now call Iran. This is not just the story of a country, but the story of civilizations rising, falling, and leaving echoes that still shape the modern world. So take a deep breath. Imagine the deserts, mountains, and ancient cities, and let's begin. Long before Iran was called Iran, long before maps had borders or nations had flags, this land was already alive with human activity. The Iranian plateau, with its harsh deserts and fertile valleys, became home to some of the earliest civilizations in human history. Around 3000 BCE, ancient peoples known as the Elamites settled in the southwest of the region. They built cities, developed their own language, and created one of the first organized societies in the area. While they are often overshadowed by later empires, the Elamites laid the foundation for urban life in Iran. As centuries passed, waves of Indo-Iranian tribes migrated into the plateau from Central Asia. These tribes brought new languages, beliefs, and social structures. Among them were groups that would later become known as the Medes and the Persians. At first, they were scattered tribes, living in small communities, herding animals, and slowly adapting to the land. They were not yet emperors or conquerors, just people trying to survive in a challenging environment. The Medes were the first to truly unite the Iranian tribes. By the 7th century BCE, they formed a powerful kingdom in western Iran. They organized armies, built strongholds, and challenged the dominant power of the time, the Assyrian Empire. When the Assyrians finally fell, the Medes stood as a major force in the region. For the first time, something resembling an Iranian state had emerged. But history was preparing an even bigger chapter. From the southern region of Persis rose a man whose name would echo across centuries. Cyrus. Known to history as Cyrus the Great, he didn't just conquer lands. He changed the very idea of what an empire could be. In the mid-6th century BCE, Cyrus overthrew the Median king and united the Medes and Persians under one rule. This moment marked the birth of the Achaemenid Empire, the first true Persian empire, and one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. What made Cyrus different was not only his military skill, but his vision. Instead of ruling through fear alone, he ruled through tolerance. Conquered peoples were allowed to keep their religions, customs, and local traditions. This approach helped stabilize his vast empire and earned him respect even among those he defeated. Many historians consider him one of the most humane rulers of the ancient world. Under Cyrus and his successors, the Persian Empire expanded rapidly. It stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to Asia Minor and parts of the Mediterranean in the west. Managing such a massive empire required innovation, and the Persians delivered. They built roads that connected distant regions, created an efficient administrative system, and introduced standardized taxation. Communication across the empire became faster than ever before. Religion also played a crucial role in shaping early Iranian identity. During this period, Zoroastrianism began to take form. Based on the teachings attributed to the prophet Zoroaster, it introduced powerful ideas: the struggle between good and evil, the importance of moral choice, and the belief that humans are responsible for their actions. These concepts would later influence other major religions and philosophies around the world. The empire reached its peak during the reign of Darius the Great. He reorganized the state, divided it into provinces, improved the legal system, and launched ambitious construction projects. Grand palaces rose from the ground, symbolizing imperial power and cultural unity. Persia was no longer just a military empire. It was a sophisticated, multicultural superpower. However, no empire lasts forever. Internal revolts, court intrigues, and the rise of powerful enemies began to weaken the foundations of Persian rule. In the 4th century BCE, a young Macedonian king named Alexander launched a campaign against Persia. Despite their vast resources, the Persians were defeated. Cities fell, palaces burned, and the Achaemenid Empire came to an end. Yet, this was not the end of Iran's story. Even in defeat, Persian culture survived. Administrators, scholars, and traditions continued to influence the new rulers. The idea of Iran as a cultural and historical entity refused to disappear. It adapted, transformed, and waited for its next chapter. And that's where we'll pause for now. In the next part, we'll explore how Iran survived foreign rule, how it blended Persian identity with new beliefs, and how it entered the Islamic era without losing its soul. The story is far from over. This was only the beginning. When the armies of Alexander the Great swept into Persia, they didn't just defeat an empire. They shattered a political order that had ruled much of the known world. Yet what followed was not a simple collapse, but a long, complicated period of transformation. Iran entered an age where foreign rulers sat on Persian thrones, but Persian culture quietly shaped those rulers from within. After Alexander's sudden death, his vast empire fractured. Iran fell under the control of the Seleucids, a Greek-speaking dynasty that tried to impose Hellenistic culture across the region. New cities were founded, Greek became the language of administration, and statues of Greek gods appeared where Persian symbols once stood. On the surface, it looked like Iran was being absorbed into a Greek world. But beneath that surface, something very different was happening. Persian traditions did not disappear. Local elites continued to manage daily affairs. Zoroastrian beliefs survived in communities, and Iranian identity remained strong in rural areas. The Seleucid rulers were powerful, but distant, and over time, their grip weakened. That weakness opened the door for a uniquely Iranian revival. From the northeast rose the Parthians. The Parthian Empire emerged around the 3rd century BCE, founded by a semi-nomadic Iranian people who mastered cavalry warfare. Unlike the centralized Persian empires before them, the Parthians ruled through a looser system of noble families and regional kings. This made their empire harder to control, but also harder to destroy. What truly defined the Parthians was their role as a bridge between East and West. Sitting along the Silk Road, they controlled trade routes connecting Rome, India, and China. Silk, spices, ideas, and religions flowed through Iranian lands. Iran was no longer just an empire. It was a crossroads of civilizations. For centuries, the Parthians stood toe-to-toe with Rome, one of the most powerful empires in history. Roman legions marched east. Parthian horse archers met them with speed and strategy. Victories and defeats came on both sides, but one thing became clear. Iran was no longer a conquered land. It was once again a major power. Eventually, internal divisions weakened the Parthian state. From within Iran itself rose a new dynasty that would restore centralized authority and revive ancient traditions with renewed intensity: the Sassanian Empire. The Sassanians didn't just rule, they made a statement. They presented themselves as the true heirs of the ancient Persian kings. Zoroastrianism became the official state religion. Royal imagery emphasized divine authority, and Persian culture was actively promoted. Art, architecture, philosophy, and science flourished. Iran entered what many historians call a second golden age. Under the Sassanians, Iran became a superpower once again, rivaling the Roman and later Byzantine Empire. Massive battles were fought, borders shifted, and diplomacy became as important as warfare. Persian courts dazzled foreign envoys, while Iranian scholars preserved and expanded knowledge that would later pass into the Islamic world. But greatness often comes with exhaustion. Endless wars drained resources. Political struggles weakened the state from within. And just as Iran had survived Greeks and Romans, a new force was rising from the south. Unexpected, fast-moving, and fueled by a powerful new faith. By the 7th century, Arab Muslim armies crossed into Iranian territory. The Sassanians, worn down by decades of conflict, could not resist for long. One by one, cities fell. The last Sassanian king fled, and with his fall, the ancient pre-Islamic era of Iran came to an end. Yet once again, Iran did not vanish. Instead, it adapted. When Iran entered the Islamic era, it did not do so as a blank slate. The Arab conquests of the 7th century brought a new religion, a new political order, and a new language of power. But they did not erase what came before. Instead, Iran began one of the most fascinating transformations in history: the blending of Islam with a deeply rooted Persian civilization. After the fall of the Sassanian Empire, Iran became part of the rapidly expanding Islamic Caliphate. Arabic became the official language of administration, and Islam spread quickly through cities and towns. At first, political power rested firmly in Arab hands. Many Persians converted to Islam, some out of belief, others out of necessity. Yet even in this new order, Iranian culture quietly endured. What followed was not cultural disappearance, but cultural negotiation. Persians soon became indispensable to the Islamic world. They served as administrators, scholars, poets, physicians, and philosophers. While Arabic dominated religion and law, Persian ways of thinking began to influence governance, art, and intellectual life. Slowly, a new Islamic civilization emerged, one that was deeply shaped by Iranian minds. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Iranian dynasties began to reappear, ruling in the name of the caliph, but governing independently. Among them, the Samanid dynasty played a crucial role. Under their rule, the Persian language was reborn, not as a rival to Islam, but as its companion. Persian literature flourished, and for the first time, Islamic ideas were expressed in a distinctly Iranian voice. This was the age of poets and thinkers. Epic stories were written to preserve Iran's ancient past, the most famous being the Shahnameh, a monumental work that told the story of Iranian kings and heroes from myth to history. It was more than literature, it was cultural survival. Through words, Iran remembered who it was. At the same time, Iranian scholars helped shape Islamic science, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Cities like Bukhara, Nishapur, and later Isfahan became centers of learning. Knowledge flowed freely, translated from Greek, Indian, and Persian sources into Arabic, then expanded and refined. Much of what Europe would later rediscover during the Renaissance passed through Iranian hands. Politically, however, Iran remained fragmented. Various dynasties rose and fell, each adding a layer to Iranian identity. Among the most powerful were the Seljuks, Turkic rulers who embraced Persian culture wholeheartedly. Persian became the language of court and literature once again, proving that political power could change hands, but cultural authority remained Iranian. Yet fragmentation also brought vulnerability. In the 13th century, a storm arrived from the east. The Mongols, led by Genghis Khan, swept across Iran with devastating force. Cities were destroyed, populations massacred, and centuries of progress seemed to vanish overnight. For a moment, it looked like Iran might finally be broken beyond repair. But history had taught Iran resilience. Over time, the Mongol rulers themselves were absorbed into Persian culture. They converted to Islam, adopted Iranian administrative systems, and sponsored art and architecture. Once again, conquerors became carriers of Persian tradition. From destruction came renewal. By the late medieval period, Iran was ready for something it hadn't had in centuries: unity. That unity arrived with the rise of the Safavid Empire. In the early 16th century, the Safavids transformed Iran in a way that would permanently define its identity. They declared Twelver Shia Islam as the state religion, sharply distinguishing Iran from its mostly Sunni neighbors. This decision reshaped politics, religion, and society, and its effects are still felt today. For the first time since the Sassanians, Iran was a centralized, independent state with clear borders, a shared religious identity, and a revived sense of nationhood. Persian culture, language, and traditions were no longer just surviving, they were leading. And with that transformation, Iran stepped fully into the early modern world. With the rise of the Safavid Empire, Iran had finally regained something it had lost for centuries: unity. A centralized state, a clear territorial identity, and a shared religious framework gave Iran a renewed sense of purpose. But history rarely allows stability to last for long. The Safavid period was a time of cultural brilliance. Persian art, architecture, and philosophy flourished, and cities like Isfahan became symbols of imperial confidence. Yet beneath this golden surface, cracks were forming. Weak rulers, court corruption, and economic strain slowly undermined the state. By the early 18th century, foreign invasions and internal rebellions brought the Safavid era to an end. What followed was chaos. Iran entered a turbulent period marked by short-lived dynasties and constant power struggles. The Afsharid dynasty, led by the formidable Nader Shah, briefly restored Iran's military strength. His campaigns terrified enemies and expanded borders, but his brutal rule left the country exhausted. After his assassination, Iran once again fell into instability. Eventually, the Qajar dynasty emerged and ruled Iran into the 19th century. This era marked a turning point, not because of internal strength, but because of growing external pressure. Europe was changing fast. Industrialization, modern armies, and global trade were reshaping the world, and Iran found itself dangerously unprepared. Russia and Britain became deeply involved in Iranian affairs. Through wars, treaties, and political manipulation, Iran lost territory and economic independence. Railways, factories, and modern institutions appeared, but mostly served foreign interests. For the first time, Iran was not just facing conquerors with swords, but empires with banks, industries, and global influence. This period sparked something new in Iranian society: awareness. Intellectuals, clerics, merchants, and students began questioning absolute monarchy and foreign domination. This tension exploded in the early 20th century with the Constitutional Revolution. Iranians demanded a parliament, a constitution, and limits on royal power. Though imperfect and fragile, this movement marked Iran's first serious step toward modern political life. Out of the chaos of the early 20th century rose a new strongman, Reza Shah Pahlavi. Determined to modernize Iran, he centralized power, built infrastructure, reformed education, and reduced the influence of traditional elites. Iran was pushed rapidly toward a modern nation-state, but at a cost. Political freedoms were limited, dissent was crushed, and modernization was imposed from the top down. After World War II, his son, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, continued this path. Oil wealth transformed Iran's economy, cities expanded, and Western influence grew stronger than ever. To some, Iran looked like a rising modern power. To others, it felt like a country losing its soul. The gap between tradition and modernity widened. Religious leaders, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens grew increasingly frustrated with inequality, authoritarian rule, and foreign interference, especially after the overthrow of Iran's elected prime minister in the 1950s. The pressure kept building, quietly, relentlessly. By the late 1970s, Iran stood on the edge of another historic transformation. In the next and final part, we'll witness the Islamic Revolution, the birth of the modern Islamic Republic, and Iran's complex position in today's world. A nation shaped by ancient memory, revolutionary change, and ongoing struggle. By the late 1970s, Iran was a country filled with tension. On the surface, it looked modern. Highways, oil money, growing cities, and a powerful army. But underneath, many Iranians felt disconnected from the state that ruled them. Political repression, deep social inequality, cultural alienation, and the heavy presence of foreign influence had created a sense that something was fundamentally broken. That pressure finally exploded in 1979. The Iranian Revolution was not a single movement, but a wave made of many currents. Religious groups, leftists, students, intellectuals, workers, and ordinary citizens poured into the streets. What united them was opposition to the monarchy and a demand for change. As protests grew, the state lost control. The army fractured. The Shah fled the country. Into this moment stepped a figure who would redefine Iran's future. Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini returned from exile to massive crowds and quickly became the symbolic and political leader of the revolution. Within months, Iran transformed from a monarchy into a new political system, the Islamic Republic of Iran. The new state blended republican institutions like elections and parliament with religious authority, placing ultimate power in the hands of clerical leadership. For many, the revolution felt like a reclaiming of identity. Iran was no longer trying to imitate the West. It was choosing its own path, rooted in religion, independence, and resistance to foreign dominance. But revolutionary idealism soon met harsh reality. Almost immediately, the new republic faced its greatest test. In 1980, Iraq invaded Iran, triggering the Iran-Iraq War. What followed was 8 years of brutal conflict, trench warfare, missile attacks, chemical weapons, and massive casualties. The war devastated Iran's economy and cost hundreds of thousands of lives, but it also hardened the new state. Survival became ideology. Sacrifice became virtue. Resistance became identity. When the war finally ended in 1988, Iran emerged wounded but unbroken. The decades that followed were defined by contradiction. Iran rebuilt its cities, expanded education, and developed strong scientific and technological sectors. At the same time, political freedoms remained limited, and tensions between reformist and conservative visions of the republic never disappeared. Elections mattered, but only within strict boundaries. Society kept changing faster than politics could follow. Internationally, Iran became one of the most controversial states in the world. Its anti-Western stance, regional influence, and nuclear ambitions placed it in constant conflict with global powers. Sanctions hit the economy hard, affecting everyday life for millions of Iranians. Yet pressure from outside often strengthened nationalist feeling inside the country rather than weakening it. Today's Iran is complex, layered, and deeply misunderstood. It is a country where ancient poetry is quoted on social media, where modern youth navigate tradition and global culture at the same time, where faith and frustration coexist. It is neither frozen in the past nor fully at peace with the present. Iran carries the weight of thousands of years of history, and that weight shapes every political decision, every protest, every act of resistance. From the first ancient settlements to mighty empires, from conquest to revival, from revolution to modern struggle, Iran has never stopped redefining itself. And perhaps that is the true story of Iran. Not just survival, but transformation. History did not end here. It never does.